"We have your daughter, sir." The voice on the phone identified himself as a police sergeant, and my first thought wasn't fear, it was confusion. I'd checked on her myself less than 6 hours earlier. The way I'd done every night since the divorce left just the two of us in this house. Her bedroom door cracked open exactly the way she liked it. "That's not possible," I told him. "She's asleep down the hall." He went silent, then asked if she owned a gray sedan, a car I'd never once heard her mention. I hung up without answering and walked toward her room, already knowing something in that question didn't belong to any missing persons call I'd ever heard of. "I appreciate you choosing to spend this time with me. One small thing before we start. Drop a comment and let me know, have you ever trusted someone for years, only to discover they weren't who you thought? Yes or no? I'd genuinely love to hear your answer. I read more of your words than you might realize." A quick note: some details in this story have been fictionalized for narrative and reflection. The core message is what truly matters. My phone rang at 3:04 in the morning, and the voice on the other end told me they were holding my daughter at a police station 40 minutes away. I sat up in the dark. The screen glowed blue against the ceiling. I am 67 years old. I built Ashford Regional Logistics from a single box truck and a handshake in 1991. And in 35 years of running freight out of Manassas, Virginia, I have learned that nothing good arrives before dawn. "Sir, we're holding your daughter Leonie Ashford at the Fairfax County Station," the man said. His voice was calm. Practice the kind of calm that comes from reading a script, not from working a desk at 3 in the morning. "She's unharmed. There was a traffic incident involving a gray sedan. We need you to come down and confirm some vehicle information." "That's not possible," I said. "My daughter is asleep in this house right now." A pause. Not the confused pause of a man who dialed the wrong number, the measured pause of someone recalculating. "Mr. Ashford, the vehicle involved is registered under your company's fleet, a gray sedan. We just need to confirm, does your daughter still have access to that vehicle?" Let me tell you something about phone calls at 3 in the morning. They are never about what the caller says they're about. A real officer would have identified his badge number. A real officer would not have pivoted from a welfare check to a fleet inventory question in under 90 seconds. And a real officer, upon being told the supposed detainee was home and safe, would have apologized for the error and hung up. This man did none of those things. He waited. He wanted me to answer the question about the sedan. I did not. "Who is this?" I asked. The line went dead. Not a disconnection, a deliberate hang-up. The silence that followed had weight to it. The kind you feel in your chest when the house settles and you realize you are alone with something you cannot yet name. I set the phone on the nightstand. My hands were steady. They have been steady through contract disputes, insurance audits, a wife's funeral, and a recession that nearly killed the company in 2009. Steady hands are not courage. They are just the habit of a man who learned early that panic is a luxury freight operators cannot afford. But my feet were cold on the hardwood, and that is what I remember most. The cold floor as I walked down the hallway toward my daughter's room. Leonie Ashford is 36. She is a commercial real estate broker who works longer hours than I ever did and refuses to admit it. She moved back into the Falls Church house 18 months ago after her lease expired, and I told her it was temporary. We both know it is not. She is the reason the lights stay on in that house after dark, and she is the reason I checked. I pushed her door open without knocking. She was asleep, reading glasses still on, laptop half closed on the duvet, one sock off the way she has fallen asleep since college. A half-finished mug of coffee sat on her nightstand. Cold. The smell of it stale and familiar. I stood in her doorway, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3. The way I used to when she was small, and I needed proof the world had not taken her while I slept. She was here. She was safe. And the relief lasted exactly as long as it took me to close her door and walk to the front window. The street was empty. Falls Church at 3 in the morning looks the way every Virginia suburb looks, porch lights on timers, garbage cans at the curb, nothing moving. Except there was something. 3 houses down, on the opposite side, a dark vehicle sat parked against the curb. No interior light, no exhaust plume, engine off, or idling so quietly I could not tell from behind glass. I watched it for 10 seconds. On the 11th, the vehicle pulled away from the curb, no headlights. It rolled through the stop sign at the end of the block and disappeared left onto Maple, and the street returned to the kind of silence that makes you doubt what you saw. In my neighborhood, at 3 in the morning. That is not a neighbor coming home late. That is someone who was waiting. And when I looked out the window, they decided they had waited long enough. The caller knew my daughter's full name, knew she lived in this house, knew my company ran a fleet, and asked a question about a gray sedan that had nothing to do with any police report, because there was no police report, no traffic stop, no station holding anyone. The entire call was a frame built around one question, and I was supposed to answer it without thinking. I walked back to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the mattress, opened the nightstand drawer, and pulled out what I have kept there for 11 years. A spiral notebook, cloth-covered, the binding soft from use. Every page filled with dates, times, and phone numbers that did not add up. Calls from clients I never contacted. Messages relayed through numbers that rang dead when I called back. 11 years of small disruptions I could never prove and never explain. Logged in my own handwriting, because I learned the hard way that the phone can be a weapon if you let it fire without keeping a record. I uncapped a pen, wrote the date, the time, the number from the caller ID, which I already knew would trace to nothing. And beneath them, one word sedan. Whoever made that call knew things about my family that strangers should not know. And whoever was parked outside my house drove away the moment I looked, which meant they saw me looking. The call and the car were not coincidence. They were coordination. I closed the logbook and set it on the nightstand beside the phone. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark and waited for a dawn that felt, for the first time in 35 years, like it was taking too long to arrive. Dawn came slow and gray, and I drove to the yard anyway. I had not slept. The logbook sat in my jacket pocket with its fresh entry, and the image of that dark vehicle pulling away without headlights played behind my eyes every time I blinked. But a man who built something with his hands needs to stand in the middle of it when he feels the ground shifting. The Ashford Regional Logistics Yard in Manassas, Virginia, covers 11 acres. 47 rigs parked in rows. 3 warehouses. A dispatch office I built out of a converted trailer in 1991 and replaced with a real building in 2004. I started with 1 second-hand flatbed and a client list I kept on an index card. 35 years later, the operation moves freight across 14 states. And the accountants tell me the whole thing, trucks, warehouses, contracts, and the land underneath is worth north of $50 million. I have never once felt rich. I have felt busy. I have felt tired. I have felt the particular satisfaction of watching a loaded rig pull out of my yard on time. Every time. Because my name is on the door and my name does not run late. I walk the rows in the early light. The chrome bumpers caught the first sun, each one reflecting a dull orange strip across the asphalt. I stopped at the end of the first row where truck number 1 sits. The original flatbed, restored. Parked by the office entrance, like other men keep a trophy on a shelf. The Ashford logo on the door has faded to a ghost of itself, but I have never repainted it. That truck carried the first load I ever invoiced. 18 pallets of drywall to a site in Roanoke. March of 1991. I put my hand on the hood. The metal was cold and beaded with dew. People ask me why I never sold. 3 recessions, a wife's funeral, and a daughter who once told me the trucks mattered more to her than she did, and I still never sold. The answer is not complicated. You do not sell the thing that taught you who you are. You defend it. And if someone is circling it in the dark, you find out who and you find out why. I went inside. The break room thermos was already full. Somebody on the early crew had started coffee. I poured a cup. Black, no sugar. The way I have taken it since the first year, when sugar was a cost I could not justify. The office smelled the way it always does before 8 o'clock. Motor oil drifting in from the bays, dew burning off the asphalt outside, and the faint industrial hum of a building that has been running longer than most of the men who work in it. By 10 o'clock I was at my desk, reviewing the week's dispatch schedule when Donna Rowe knocked on the open door. Donna has been my office assistant for 14 years. She runs the front desk the way an air traffic controller runs a tower. Nothing passes through without a log time and a callback number. She is 59 years old, has never missed a Monday. And if she tells you someone called, she can recite the exact minute and what the caller's voice sounded like. Mr. Ashford, a Sergeant Briggs from Fairfax County called while you were in the yard, she said. Said he needed to follow up about your daughter's situation last night. He left a number. My hand stopped on the dispatch sheet. I did not look up immediately. I let the words settle, and I measured them the way you measure a load that feels heavier than the manifest says it should. Did he say anything else? I asked. Just that it was routine follow-up and could you call at your convenience. Polite. Professional. She set the message slip on my desk. The number's right there. I thanked her. She left. I looked at the number on the slip. It was not a Fairfax County prefix. I have lived in Northern Virginia for 40 years, and I know every municipal prefix the way a mechanic knows socket sizes by feel, without thinking. This was wrong. Have you ever dialed a number knowing it would not connect, but needing to hear the silence on the other end to be sure I picked up the receiver and dialed? One ring. Then, nothing. Not a voicemail, not a busy signal. Dead air. The kind of silence that is not empty but occupied, as if someone on the other end was listening to me listen to them. Then the line dropped. I set the phone down slowly. The receiver was still warm from Donna's hand when she had answered the original call. I pulled the logbook from my jacket and opened it on the desk. 2 entries now. 12 hours apart. The first at 3:04 in the morning from a man who knew my daughter's name. The second at 10:15 from a man who used a different fake name but referenced the same fabricated incident. 2 different numbers, both untraceable. Both asking me to engage, to call back, to confirm details about a night that never happened. A con artist calls once and hopes you panic. A strategist calls twice and watches how you move. Whoever was behind this was not guessing. They had my home number and my office number. They knew my daughter lived with me. They knew I ran a fleet. And they were willing to impersonate law enforcement. A federal offense which meant the stakes on their end were high enough to justify the risk. I closed the logbook and slid it back into my jacket. Somewhere in that spiral notebook, between 11 years of dead-end numbers and disconnected calls, was a pattern I had never been able to see. But now I had 2 data points, 12 hours apart. And for the first time, the pattern was not hiding. It was introducing itself. The only question worth asking was what I owned that someone thought was worth this much effort to take. 2 calls in 12 hours. Both fake, both precise. By early afternoon, I had stopped wondering if someone was targeting me and started treating it as fact. I called the real police that afternoon, not to report a crime, but to confirm one had been committed against me. The Fairfax County non-emergency line put me on hold for 4 minutes. Hold music, something instrumental and forgettable. The kind of sound that fills a silence designed to make you reconsider why you called. I did not reconsider. When the dispatcher came on, I gave her the date, the time, and my daughter's name. I told her a man identifying himself as a sergeant had called my home at 3 in the morning, claiming to have Leonie in custody. I asked her to check. She was thorough. I will give her that. She searched incident reports, the roster, and the call log. It took less than 2 minutes. "Sir, I've checked every report filed in the last 48 hours, she said. "There's nothing involving a Leonie Ashford. No traffic stop, no incident, and we don't have a Sergeant Briggs on our roster. We never have." "I appreciate your time, ma'am," I said. "That tells me exactly what I needed to know." I hung up. The office was quiet. Donna was at lunch. The dispatch board hummed in the next room. Tracking rigs across 3 states, and outside the window the yard baked in September heat. 47 trucks in their rows, the warehouses throwing long shadows, the whole operation running the way it was supposed to run. Everything looked normal. Nothing was. When a police dispatcher tells you no one on her force has ever heard of the man who called your home at 3 in the morning, you do not feel relief. You feel the floor tilt, because now you know for certain that's someone not a prankster, not a wrong number, not a confused telemarketer built an entire police interaction from nothing. They invented a name. They spoofed a number. They called my home. Then called my office 12 hours later, using a different fake identity to reference the same fabricated event. That takes planning. That takes money. And it tells you the person behind it has already decided you are worth the risk of impersonating law enforcement, which is a federal crime they clearly do not fear. I opened the logbook and stared at the 2 entries. 11 years of strange calls filled those pages. Disconnected numbers, phantom messages, clients who called to confirm bids I never submitted. I had always treated them as noise, static on the line of a business that ran 100 calls a day. But these 2 entries were different. They were not noise. They were a signal. And it was aimed directly at my family. I closed the book. I poured the last of the coffee from my desk mug and drank it cold. It had gone bitter hours ago, but bitterness is a taste I have learned to tolerate. I set the mug down and turned to the window. Watching the yard, because watching the yard has always been the thing that steadies me when the ground is unsteady. At 3:15, Leonie walked in. She had driven from her office to drop off lunch roast chicken and rosemary from the deli near her building. Wrapped in brown paper and still warm. She set the bag on my desk, kissed my forehead, and asked if I had eaten. I had not. She shook her head the way she does, half amused and half exasperated, and went to use the restroom down the hall. Her phone was on the counter. She had set it there face down the way she always does, a habit from client meetings, screen down so nothing distracts. I was not looking at it. I was unwrapping the chicken. Then the phone buzzed once against the laminate, and the screen lit up. I watched my daughter set her phone down on my counter the way she had done 1,000 times. And for the first time in her life, I was afraid of what that phone knew about her. The notification sat on the lock screen. A text from a number with no contact name. 5 words. "We need to talk about the car." I did not pick it up. I did not unlock it. I read those 5 words through the glass, standing 2 feet away with a piece of roast chicken going cold in my hand, and I felt something shift in the center of my chest that had nothing to do with the food. The sedan. The same question the fake sergeant had asked me at 3 in the morning was now sitting on my daughter's phone, sent from a number she apparently did not recognize. I memorized the number, 10 digits. I repeated them twice in my head, then turned back to the desk and wrote them in the logbook beneath the other 2. 3 entries. Less than a day. The pen pressed hard into the paper because my hand was no longer as steady as it had been that morning. Leonie came back down the hall, heels clicking on the tile. She picked up her phone without looking at the screen, dropped it in her bag, and sat down across from me. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said. "But that's nothing new." She laughed. I did not. She ate. I watched her and tried to keep my face the way it always is, calm, steady. The father who has answers. But the truth was filling the room like gas from a slow leak. Whoever was running this was not just targeting me anymore. How do you protect someone from a threat they do not know exists, without becoming the thing that frightens them? The first two numbers had come to me. This one went to Leonie. The campaign had widened. The sedan question had a second thread now, and it led directly to my daughter. I closed the logbook and slid it back into my jacket while she finished her lunch. I smiled when she told me about a property closing that had gone well, and I said nothing about the 5 words sitting in her phone. Not yet, but soon, because the circle was tightening and my daughter was inside it. I waited until she was sitting down with a glass of wine before I asked, because the kind of question I was about to drop on the table was the kind that changes the way a daughter looks at her father. We were in the kitchen. During was roasted chicken and garlic, Leonie's recipe, the one she makes when she is trying to pretend everything is normal. The smell filled the house, and neither of us was hungry. "Do you remember a gray sedan from the company fleet?" I asked. "A few years back? You lent it to someone." She did not hesitate. "The gray sedan, Dad, that was years ago. I lent it to a guy from Dispatch, Garrett something." She reached for the bread. Garrett Lindsay. He needed wheels for a month while his car was in the shop. I signed the loaner form myself. Why? Because someone used that car to ask me a question at 3 in the morning. Her fork stopped. The bread stayed in her hand. She looked at me the way she used to look at a contract clause that did not add up. Not scared, not yet, but recalculating. "What do you mean someone used it to ask you a question?" I told her. Not everything, not the text on her phone, not the second call to the office, but enough. The fake sergeant, the spoofed number, the question about the sedan that had nothing to do with any police report. She listened without interrupting, and I watched the moment land on her face when the memory of lending a car to a coworker stopped being a memory and became evidence. There is a moment in every conversation when the thing you are discussing crosses a line you cannot uncross. I watched it happen on my daughter's face in real time. Her wine glass hovered an inch above the table. She set it down without drinking. "Dad," she said. "Garrett works for Meridian Capital now. I heard their name come up at a closing last month. They are buying into logistics companies, regional ones." The kitchen was quiet. The garlic smell that had been warm and familiar 2 minutes ago now sat in the air like something stale. Leonie's hand found my forearm across the table and gripped it once, hard, the way she does when she wants me to know she's serious. "How do you know that?" I asked. "A broker in my office mentioned it. Meridian Capital Partners. They have been making offers to mid-size freight operators up and down the East Coast. Quiet offers. Below market. The kind that come with a deadline and no negotiation." She pulled her hand back and picked up her wine. She did not drink it. She held it like a prop, something to do with her fingers while her mind worked. "You think this is about the company," she said. It was not a question. "I think someone wants what I built," I said. "And I think they are willing to use you to get it." We sat with that for a long time. Dinner went cold. The plates stayed where they were. Leonie finally stood, cleared the table without a word, and went upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close. Not a slam, just a quiet click that carried more weight than any argument we had ever had. I went to the study. The house was dark except for the desk lamp, which threw a cone of yellow light across the phone and the logbook. I sat down and opened to the page with 3 entries. 3 numbers. Less than 2 days. I drew a line connecting them. The home call, the office call, the text to Leonie, and stared at the triangle they made. At 10:45, the home phone rang. If you have ever had someone say your child's name in a sentence, designed to sound polite, but feel like a knife laid flat against skin, you know the kind of silence I gave that caller. The voice was male, calm, unhurried. No name, no company. The diction of a man who had rehearsed his lines or delivered them before. "Mr. Ashford." "I won't take much of your time," he said. "I would encourage you to give serious thought to the proposal you will receive this week regarding your company's future." I said nothing. I let the silence do what silence does. It makes the other person fill it. He filled it. "You have valuable contracts, a strong regional footprint, and, of course, a daughter who has built quite a career in commercial real estate. It would be a shame for any of that to become complicated." The line held for 3 seconds. Then a flat click, and he was gone. I set the receiver down. My hand was steady. The rest of me was not. He had said Leone's name the way a man mentions the weather, casually, as if it cost him nothing to say and would cost me everything to ignore. 3 calls, 2 days, 1 daughter. This was not a scam. This was a siege. I wrote the 4th number in the logbook, drew another line. The triangle became a box, and at the center of every line was the same word I had written the night before. Sedan. I flipped to a clean page and wrote 2 words at the top. Meridian Capital. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had not called in years. It belonged to a man named Murray Holbrook. He was 69 years old. Retired from 30 years of tracking financial crimes for the federal government. And he lived alone in a house in Arlington, where he kept a police band scanner on the kitchen counter because he had never learned how to stop listening. I had done him a favor once, a long time ago, and he had told me to call if I ever needed one back. I had never collected. Tonight, I was collecting. The phone rang twice. He picked up on the second ring. The way retired investigators do when they never fully retired. "Vernon," he said. "It's been a while. What's wrong?" "Everything," I said. "And I need someone who knows how to follow money." Murray Holbrook lived in a brick colonial in Arlington, with a flag out front and a police band scanner on the kitchen counter. He was 69 years old, retired from 3 decades of tracking financial crimes for the federal government, and he opened the door before I knocked because he had been watching me park from the window. That is the kind of man Murray is. He does not stop observing just because the pension check started. I set the logbook and the cassette recorder on his kitchen table. He poured 2 cups of coffee dark roast, no sugar, strong enough to strip paint, and sat down without a word. I told him everything. The calls, the fake sergeant, the sedan question, the text on Leone's phone, the anonymous voice that mentioned her name like it cost nothing. Murray listened the way a man listens when he has heard worse, but respects what you are carrying. Then he played the cassette. I had recorded the first spoofed call on the old machine I keep beside the bed, a habit from years of taping late-night dispatch confirmations. Murray listened once, rewound it, and played it again. His reading glasses were on, his pen was out. Let me tell you what it feels like to sit across from a man who spent 30 years tracing dirty money, and watch him look at your logbook the way a doctor looks at an X-ray he does not like. He does not panic. He does not reassure you. He turns the page, makes a note, and asks a question that tells you he already sees the shape of what you are only beginning to suspect. "This isn't some kid with a burner app, Vernon," he said. "These calls are routed through commercial relay services. Someplace is paying $400-500 per deployment to make your phone show a police prefix. That's not intimidation on a budget, that's a line item. Why would anyone spend that kind of money to scare a 67-year-old man? Because they think you'll fold. And because whatever they want from you is worth a lot more than $500 a call." He tapped the logbook. "You've been keeping records like this for 11 years? Since the first time someone tried to con me out of a fuel contract. Old habit." "It's not a habit, Vernon." He closed the book gently. "It's a case file. You just didn't know you were building one." Murray's kitchen smelled like coffee and old newsprint. He kept stacks of newspapers by the back door because he trusted ink more than screens. He agreed to help without asking for money or time to think. He would start pulling public filings on Meridian Capital Partners. I should go home and pull something else, the personnel file of the man who borrowed the sedan. I drove back to Manassas that afternoon and went to the records room at the yard. Windowsless, lined with filing cabinets. The fluorescent light buzzing its low, insistent hum. Personnel files are strange things. They hold the shape of a person's time with you the way a pressed flower holds the shape of something that was once alive. I found Garrett Lindsay's folder in the third cabinet. 8 years old, thin. He had been a fleet dispatcher for 3 years, left under vague disciplinary notes that said more by what they omitted than what they included. Performance issues. Mutual agreement. No forwarding address. I opened the hiring application. Standard form, name, address, prior employment, emergency contact, and at the bottom, the guarantor line. Every hourly hire at Ashford Logistics needed a professional reference willing to sign. It was a policy I started in the early days when I could not afford background checks and relied instead on the weight of a name. The signature on the guarantor line was written in blue ink. Faded, but legible. I knew the handwriting before I read the name. I knew the slant of the capital letter. The way the last name trailed off without lifting the pen. The slight rightward lean that came from years of signing contracts on the hoods of trucks in parking lots. There are signatures you recognize the way you recognize a voice instantly, and with a sickness in your stomach when you find them somewhere they do not belong. I read the name. Then I read it again. My hand developed a tremor I could not will away, and I pressed my other palm flat against the filing cabinet to steady myself. The metal was cold. The room was silent. The fluorescent light hummed, and I stood alone in the records room of the company I built, holding proof that someone I once trusted had placed a man inside my operation years before the first spoofed call. Years before any of this began, I whispered the name to the empty room. Just once. A name from a chapter of my life I thought had been closed and shelved, the way I had shelved this very file. I carried the folder out through the dispatch office, past Donna's empty desk, and into my car. Set it on the passenger seat beside the logbook, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The yard was quiet. The afternoon sun hit the windshield, and I did not feel it. The guarantor had signed Garrett Lindsay into my company. Not as a favor, not as a casual reference, as a placement deliberate, documented, and years ahead of the campaign that was now closing around me like a net. The question I could not stop turning over was whether the man whose handwriting I recognized had been planning this since before I stopped trusting him, or since after. Either answer meant the same thing. The betrayal had roots older than the logbook, older than the calls, older than anything I had been willing to see. I drove home that evening with Garrett Lindsay's hiring form on the passenger seat, and a question I already knew the answer to. The safe in my study is a fireproof box bolted to the floor, the kind you buy when your business outgrows a filing cabinet and your trust in banks has limits. I knelt in front of it, turned the combination, and pulled out the document I needed, the original Ashford Logistics Partnership Agreement, dated 2002, signed by me and one other man. I carried it to the desk and set it beside the hiring form. The desk lamp threw amber light across both pages. I did not need a magnifying glass. I did not need a handwriting expert. The capital B was identical. The same confident stroke. The same way it leaned slightly right. The same flourish where the last name trailed off without the pen ever lifting. Boyd Prescott, my former partner. The man who helped me pour the foundation of Warehouse 1 in the summer heat of 2002. Who stood beside me at my wife's funeral, who stopped returning calls 12 years ago for reasons I never pushed him to explain. He had signed Garrett Lindsay into my company, not as a favor to a young man who needed work, as a placement, deliberate, documented, and years ahead of everything that was happening now. I want to tell you that discovering your oldest friend's handwriting on a document that proves he has been working against you feels like anger. It does not. It feels like a funeral for someone who is still alive. You sit with 2 pieces of paper under a lamp and you mourn a man who is not dead, just gone. replaced by someone who uses commercial-grade phone spoofing and anonymous threats to acquire what you built together. I closed the safe. Poured a bourbon I did not drink. The ice melted while I sat in the chair and stared at the two signatures side by side, tracing Boyd's name on each page with my thumb, as if touch could explain what logic could not. Then I called Leonie downstairs. She came into the study in socks and a sweatshirt, hair pulled back, the way she looks when she has been working on her laptop in bed. I pointed to the chair across from me. She sat. I told her everything. Boyd Prescott's name, the signature match, Murray's assessment of the spoofing costs, the shape of the campaign, the fake police calls, the sedan question, the anonymous voice on the phone that had mentioned her by name. I laid it out the way Murray had taught me to think about it, not as a series of strange events, but as a single operation with a single objective. Someone wanted my company, and that someone was a man I had once trusted with my life. Leonie did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She sat in the chair and absorbed it the way she absorbs a complicated deal, piece by piece, filing each fact into a structure that would hold weight later. If your daughter ever looks at you the way mine looked at me that night, no tears, no panic, just the steady gaze of a woman deciding she is ready to fight you, will understand why I stopped worrying about protecting her and started planning alongside her. Boyd Prescott, she said. The man who helped you build Warehouse 1. The same. His signature is on Garrett Lindsay's hiring form. He put that boy inside my company. She was quiet for a long moment. The study clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. What do you want to do, Dad? She asked. I want to know why. And I want to know before he knows I'm looking. Leonie leaned forward. Her elbows were on her knees, her hands clasped. The posture she takes in negotiations when she is about to make a move the other side will not expect. I'll call Garrett, she said. He knew me from the office. I signed the loaner form for that sedan myself. I have a reason to reach out. I can make it sound casual. A follow-up about the car. Nothing more. If he's still reachable, I'll get a read on how deep he's in. Be careful, I said. If he's scared, he'll run, and if he runs, Boyd will know we're onto him. Then I won't scare him. She said it the way she closes deals. No uncertainty, no hedging. Just the flat confidence of a woman who has spent a decade reading people across conference tables. She squeezed my shoulder once, then picked up her phone from the arm of the chair and scrolled through her contacts. The name was still there. Garrett Lindsay. Saved from years ago when she had coordinated the sedan loan through the dispatch office. She looked at me. I nodded. Do you know what it costs to trust someone for 35 years and find out the debt was never mutual? It costs you the version of yourself that believed people meant what they said, and it buys you something harder and colder in return. The willingness to send your own daughter into a conversation with a man who may be working for the person who betrayed you. Because the alternative is sitting still while they finish what they started. Leonie typed the message. Short, casual. The tone of someone reconnecting over something small. She mentioned the car, she suggested coffee, she hit send. We both stared at the screen. The message showed delivered. Then after 11 seconds that felt like a season change, the status shifted to read. A typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. The reply came 30 seconds later. One word and a time. Sure, Thursday. Leonie looked at me. I looked at the two signatures, still lying side by side on my desk. Boyd Prescott's handwriting on a partnership agreement, and Boyd Prescott's handwriting on the form that put a stranger inside my gates. Thursday, I said. She typed back a confirmation and set the phone down between us. Neither of us moved. The bourbon sat untouched, the ice long melted to nothing, and the desk lamp burned steady over documents that had turned my oldest friendship into evidence. Thursday came. Leonie drove to the diner alone while I waited at the yard, pacing the dispatch office like a man who had forgotten how to sit. She called me afterward from her car. And what she described told me more than any document in my safe. Garrett Lindsay showed up 12 minutes late, chose the seat facing the door, and ordered nothing. He was 34 years old. A former fleet dispatcher at my company who now worked as an analyst at Meridian Capital. And he arrived in a wrinkled polo and shoes that had not been polished in months. A man who looked like he had been running from something long before my daughter asked him to sit down. Leonie kept it light at first. The sedan, old office memories. She ordered 2 coffees and pushed one across the table. Garrett did not touch it. He wrapped his hands around a water glass instead. And Leonie told me later she could see the surface of the water trembling. "Whatever happened to that sedan?" "Garrett," she asked. "The gray one you borrowed." He stared at the salt shaker. I gave it back. "Why are you really here, Leonie?" She had rehearsed the next part. She mentioned the company. She mentioned that someone had been making calls, strange ones, using police names that did not exist. And then she said Boyd Prescott's name. And Garrett's hands stopped trembling, because they had moved past trembling into something worse. They went still. When a grown man cannot hold a coffee cup steady because the name of your old business partner scares him that badly, you stop wondering if you are overreacting. "Stop," he said. "Please stop. You don't know what you're pulling on." "Then tell me," Leonie said. "Someone is pressuring me. And if they find out I'm sitting here, it gets worse. For both of us." His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. And the color left his face the way light leaves a room when the bulb once. Completely. He stood so fast his chair scraped the tile. The water glass rocked but did not spill. "I can't do this. Leonie, I'm sorry." He walked out without looking back. Leonie told me she sat alone, with 2 untouched coffees for a long minute before she trusted her hands enough to drive. Hearing it secondhand was enough for me to understand what she had seen firsthand. The man who had borrowed a car from her years ago was not a conspirator. He was a hostage. She told me all of this from the parking lot. I listened, wrote Garrett's behavior in the logbook, and added a note coerced, not willing. That distinction mattered. A willing accomplice is your enemy. A frightened one is a door that might open later if you knock the right way. The next morning I learned Boyd was not content with rattling my family. He was coming for the business itself. Ray Felton walked into my office at 2 o'clock. Ray is a shipping partner of 15 years, whose handshake had never once been hesitant until the moment he sat down across from me and could not look me in the eye. He is the kind of man who says what he means and orders the same lunch every day. And watching him squirm in my office chair told me something was wrong before he opened his mouth. "Vernon, I'm going to ask you straight because we've done business 15 years, he said. Are you selling? Because there's talk you're not well, that you might be stepping back. Health reasons, some people are saying. How do you defend a reputation that took 35 years to build against a rumor that takes 35 seconds to spread? You do it the way I have done everything else in my life, by showing up." "Ray, I drove to this yard at 5 this morning," I said. "Same as every morning for 35 years. Does that sound like a man stepping back?" He relaxed. Not completely, but enough. He shook my hand on the way out, firmer this time, and drove his truck through the gate with a wave. I watched him go from the window and kept my face steady until his taillights disappeared. Then I closed the office door and sat behind my desk, and the composure I had held for Ray Felton fell away like a coat I had been wearing too long. Boyd was not just intimidating me. He was not just pressuring my daughter. He was poisoning the well, telling people in the industry that I was old, that I was fading, that the company was unstable. He was salting the ground around my house so nothing I had planted would grow. I opened the logbook to the Meridian Capital page. Below Boyd's name, I wrote 2 new lines. The first, Garrett coerced, not willing. The second, reputation attack active. I underlined both. The picture was becoming clearer with every entry. Boyd had planted an informant inside my company years ago. He had launched a spoofing campaign to break my nerve. He had targeted my daughter's phone. And now he was undermining my standing with the partners and clients who kept the trucks moving. 4 fronts, 1 objective. He wanted Ashford Regional Logistics, and he was willing to dismantle my life piece by piece until I handed it over. I picked up the phone and dialed Murray. He answered on the second ring. Same as before. Murray. It's worse than we thought, I said. He's not just coming for me. He's coming for everything I built. And he's doing it in ways I can't fight alone. Then stop fighting alone, Murray said. Bring me everything you have. The logbook, the cassette, the whole file. It's time to stop collecting and start building. I hung up, closed the logbook, and slid it into my jacket. Tomorrow morning I would be back at Murray's kitchen table. But tonight I sat in my office and listened to the yard go quiet. Truck by truck, bay by bay, until the only sound left was the security light clicking on, and the low hum of a building that did not know it was under siege. I brought Murray everything the next morning, the logbook, the cassette, the update on Garrett's panic, and the reputation rumors. He cleared the kitchen table, put on his reading glasses, and played the recording 3 times before he said a word. When he finally spoke, it was not about what the caller said. It was about what was happening behind him. Hear that? Murray pressed pause and rewound. The tape clicked in word. He pointed at the cassette player as if I could see sound. That hum, right there, under the caller's voice. Listen. He played it again. I heard it this time, a low, rhythmic pulse beneath the silence between the caller's sentences. Steady, mechanical, not a fan. Not a refrigerator. Not a car engine. That's a commercial air handler, Murray said. An HVAC system in a building with centralized climate control. Your caller was not in a house. He was not in a car. He was in an office building at 3 a.m. I sat with that. Someone had gone to a professional workspace in the middle of the night to make a phone call designed to sound like a police station. That is not the behavior of a man running a side hustle. That is the behavior of a man with a key card and a reason to be there after hours. A commercial air handler at 3 a.m. Someone clocked into an office to threaten my family, the way other people clock in to answer emails. Is this enough to take to someone? I asked. It's enough to interest someone, Murray said. He took off his glasses and set them on the table. It's not enough to arrest someone. We have spoofed calls, a frightened ex-employee, and a background hum on a cassette tape. Any decent lawyer turns that into coincidence and noise. We need Boyd talking on record about what he wants and what he is willing to do to get it. How? Murray leaned back. His kitchen smelled like reheated coffee and old newsprint. The same as before. And the morning light came through the window and lit up the cassette player like a piece of evidence on a witness stand. The best trap isn't the one you set, he said. It's the one the other man walks into because he thinks he's already won. That evening, the 3 of us sat around my dining table in Falls Church, Murray. Leone, and me with the logbook open between us, and dinner cooling untouched on the counter. Murray laid out the plan. I would attend the Regional Logistics Networking event 2 days from now. I would work the room the way I always do, but this time I would plant seeds. Tired sighs, comments about maybe stepping back, a line or 2 about how the business had gotten too big for one man to carry alone. Nothing dramatic, just enough to travel. If Boyd's network is as plugged in as we think, he'll hear it inside 48 hours, Murray said. And if he hears that you're open to selling, he'll reach out. Not through intermediaries this time. Directly. Because a man like Boyd doesn't let someone else close the deal. He wants to look you in the eye when you sign. Leone pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the hard wood, and the sound cut through the room like a line being drawn. And if he sees through it, she said, if he realizes Dad is dangling bait, then I become the pressure point again. That text on my phone wasn't a warning, it was a receipt. They already know where I am. Watching my daughter argue strategy at my dining table the way she used to argue about curfew, I realized she was not the girl I was trying to protect anymore. She was the woman standing next to me in the fight, and that terrified me more than anything Boyd had done so far. Because the moment you stop shielding your child and start planning beside her, you have admitted the danger is real enough for both of you. That's why we control the timeline, not him, Murray said. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years running operations, where the stakes were measured in years, not dollars. We set the pace. We choose the venue. And if anything moves toward Leone, we pull back before it lands. Leone looked at me. I looked at her. The dining room was quiet, except for the tick of the hallway clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. An ordinary evening sound that now reminded me of the HVAC recording and the man who had sat in a dark office to call my home. I've been setting this trap longer than he's been planning his, I said. The difference between us is that he thinks I'm a tired old man. I'm counting on it. If you have ever pretended to be weaker than you are, so the person coming for you would get close enough to see your face clearly, you know the kind of patience I am talking about. It is not calm. It is not zen. It is the clenched jaw, flat-voiced discipline of a man who knows that the next move matters more than every move before it. Murray stood. I walked him to the door. The night air was cool and smelled like cut grass in September. And the street was quiet the way Virginia suburbs are quiet deceptively, as if nothing bad has ever happened on a street with porch lights. Before he stepped off the porch, Murray turned. One more thing. When you play tired at that event, don't oversell it. Boyd knows you. If you suddenly sound like a different man, he'll smell it. I nodded. 2 days from now. I would stand in a room full of people I had done business with for decades and lie to every single one of them. I would smile and sound weary and let the word spread that the old man was finally slowing down. And somewhere on the other end of a phone line, in an office with a commercial air handler humming through the night, Boyd Prescott would hear it and believe he had already won. That was the plan. Let him believe it. Let him come close, and when he did, I would be ready. I have lied to business partners exactly once in 35 years. I did it on a Tuesday afternoon with a glass of sparkling water in my hand and a smile that cost me more than anything I have ever built. The networking event was held in the conference room at the Manassas Yard, my building. My name on the door. 40 people. Regional carriers, warehouse operators, a handful of brokers. The kind of room where everyone knows everyone, and word travels before the appetizers run out. I worked it the way I always do, handshakes, updates on routes, questions about fuel costs. But this time I planted something different between the pleasantries. 35 years is a long time. Frank, I said to a fleet owner I have known since the 90s, leaning on the railing with my water. Sometimes I wonder if I'm holding on because it's smart, or because I don't know what else to do. He laughed. I did not. Another attendee clapped my shoulder on the way to the bar. You'd never sell. Vernon? I let a pause land, looked at my glass. I used to think that too. Lying well is a lot like driving a truck on black ice. The moment you overcorrect is the moment you lose everything. I kept Murray's warning in my ear. Don't oversell it. Boyd knows you. So I did not oversell it. I was not dramatic. I was tired in the way that 67-year-old men are sometimes tired, which is to say quietly, without announcement, in the spaces between sentences where people fill in what they want to hear. By 5 o'clock, the room was thinning. I shook the last hands, thanked the caterers, and walked to my truck in the parking lot. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A text from a number I did not recognize. No name, no greeting. 7 words. We should meet privately. Name your place. I read it twice. The bait had been in the water for 3 hours. Something had already bitten. I pocketed the phone, finished my water, and drove home with the taste of sparkling going flat in my mouth and the knowledge that whatever came next, I had started it. At 9:30 that night, my phone rang. Not the unknown number. Leonie. My daughter's voice does not shake. Not when she closed her first $1 million deal at 28. Not when her marriage ended. Not when I told her that Boyd Prescott's name was on a document that proved he had been working against our family for years. Her voice was shaking now. "Dad, there's a car behind me," she said. "Same kind as the one outside our house that first night. Dark, no plates I can read. It's been there for 6 blocks. I'm pulling into my office lot." "Stay in the car," I said. I was already off the couch, keys in hand. "Doors locked, I'm 15 minutes out." I drove those 15 minutes the way a man drives when his daughter is sitting alone in a parking lot with a dark sedan circling her block. I did not speed. I did not run lights. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my jaw locked and my eyes on the road because the one thing I could not afford was to be pulled over while Leonie waited. There is a particular kind of rage that only fathers know. The kind that makes your hands perfectly still. Because everything inside you is moving too fast to tremble. The sedan was gone when I arrived. Leonie's car sat alone under a parking lot light. Engine running. Her face visible through the windshield, pale, controlled, watching me pull in. I parked beside her and got out. She rolled her window down. "It left 2 minutes ago," she said. "Drove past once, slow. Then turned onto Main and disappeared." I walked to the front of her car. Under the wiper blade, tucked against the glass, a folded piece of white paper. I pulled it free and opened it under the parking lot light. One name, written in blue ink, block letters. Boyd Prescott. Not a clue. Not a leak. A message. They knew what I was doing at the networking event. They knew who mattered most to me. And they had driven to my daughter's workplace to make sure I understood every move I made. They would answer with her. "Is that who I think it is?" Leonie asked from the car. "It's who I know it is," I said. I drove her home. We did not speak. She held the folded note in her lap like something that might detonate if she gripped it too hard. The streets were dark and quiet and ordinary. And I watched every set of headlights in the mirror until we pulled into the driveway. At the kitchen table, I set the note flat between us. Boyd's name stared up from the paper under the overhead light. The refrigerator hummed. The house was still. Leonie sat across from me with her coat still on. And I faced the choice I had been dreading since the night we finalized the plan. Pull back. Protect her. Let Boyd think the bait worked and the old man got scared. Or press forward, accept the meeting from the unknown number. Walk deeper into the trap we had built and risk Leonie becoming the leverage that Boyd would use to break me. I picked up my phone to call Murray. Then I set it down. This decision did not belong to Murray. It did not belong to a retired investigator or a strategy session or a logbook full of evidence. It belonged to a father sitting across from his daughter in a kitchen that smelled like cold coffee and fear, looking at a name written on a piece of paper that had been placed on her car while she sat inside it. Alone, in the dark. Leonie watched me. She did not ask what I was going to do. She waited. And in her waiting, I saw the same thing I had seen the night she volunteered to contact Garrett. Not a woman who needed protection, but a woman who needed her father to stop hesitating and decide. I made my decision before dawn. I sat at that kitchen table until the light changed outside the window. And by the time the first gray of morning pushed through the curtains, the father in me and the businessman in me had reached the same conclusion. Pulling back would not protect Leonie. It would only give Boyd more time. The note lay on the table where I had left it. Boyd Prescott's name in block letters. Blue ink. Unfamiliar handwriting. Not his hand. I had studied Boyd's signature enough times in the last week to know the difference. This was someone else. A foot soldier, an errand runner, someone willing to approach my daughter's car in a dark parking lot and leave a message under the wiper blade like a parking ticket from hell. Boyd was not hiding anymore. He was announcing himself, and he had people on the ground willing to do it for him. I carried the note to the study and held it beside the partnership agreement one last time. The handwriting did not match, but it did not need to. The name was the point. Boyd wanted me to know it was him. He wanted me afraid. Leonie appeared in the doorway, still in last night's clothes. She had not slept either. "Is it really him?" she asked. "After everything you built together?" "That's exactly why it's him," I said. "He knows every weak spot in the foundation because he helped pour it." Boyd Prescott helped me pour the concrete for Warehouse 1 on a Saturday in August. Both of us sunburned and laughing about how we would never work for anyone else again. We were in our 30s. We thought sweat equity was the only kind that mattered. And now his name was a threat pinned to my daughter's windshield by someone I would never be able to identify. 30 years. "Leonie," I said. 30 years and I didn't see it. She crossed the room and put her hand on my shoulder. "You weren't supposed to. That's how betrayal works." I closed the safe, set the note on top of the logbook. Then I picked up the phone and dialed Murray. He answered before the second ring finished. "The windshield note," I said. "Boyd's name. Not his handwriting, someone else left it, but the message is clear. He knows what I did at the event, and he's answering through Leonie." Murray was quiet for 3 seconds. When he spoke, his voice had the flat efficiency of a man shifting from analysis to operations. "The note changes things," he said. "He's not probing anymore. He's posturing. That means he thinks the bait worked. Good. Let him think he's winning." I put him on speaker so Leonie could hear. She sat across from me, arms folded, jaw set. "What do you call a man who knows the exact location of every load-bearing wall in your life because he helped you build them and then starts pulling them down? You call him what he is. You stop using the word friend, and you start using the word target." "I've got a contact at a compliance desk who owes me from the old days," Murray said. "She can pull Meridian's wire transfers, routing numbers, recipient accounts, the works. But only for another week before the request routes through compliance review instead of her. After that, we'd need a subpoena. And a subpoena means lawyers, and lawyers mean time we don't have." "How many days?" I asked. 7. 7 days. That was what stood between my family and the kind of evidence that puts a man in a federal courtroom. 7 days to draw Boyd out, get him talking, and hand Murray enough to trace the money before the window closed. Leonie leaned toward the phone. "And if Boyd realizes Dad is playing him at the media, then we need Vernon to be so convincing," Murray said, "that Boyd leaves that table already planning how to spend money he'll never touch." The room was quiet. The house creaked the way old houses do in the hours between night and morning, settling into itself. Leonie's jacket still smelled like rain from the parking lot. The coffee I had reheated for the 3rd time sat cold again on the desk. "I'm accepting the meeting," I said. Neither of them argued. Murray gave me his last piece of advice: keep it short, keep it personal, and let Boyd do the talking. Leonie squeezed my shoulder again, harder this time, and left the room without a word. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, then her bedroom door closing. The house went still. I picked up my phone and opened the text from the unknown number. 7 words, still glowing on the screen from hours ago. I typed my reply. Thursday, the Capitol Grill, Tyson's Corner, noon. Just us. I chose the Capitol Grill because Boyd would expect it. It was the kind of place he always liked: white tablecloths, leather booths, the quiet theater of expensive food served to men who wanted to feel important. I chose noon because it was public, and I chose Thursday because it gave Murray 3 days to brief his banking contact before the meeting put anything in motion that could not be taken back. The reply came in under a minute. 1 word: Done. I stared at the screen. The glow lit up my thumb and the edge of the logbook beside it. In 3 days, I would sit across a white tablecloth from the man who was trying to steal everything I had built. I would smile. I would shake his hand. I would let him order wine and talk about the old days, and believe that his 30-year con was finally paying off. And I would memorize every word he said. Because somewhere behind me, Murray Holbrook would be following the money. And somewhere ahead of me was a reckoning that Boyd Prescott had not planned for. Because the one thing he never accounted for was that the tired old man he was trying to break had been keeping records since before the first call, and had no intention of stopping now. Thursday arrived the way all reckonings do, ordinary on the surface. Loaded underneath. I put on a gray suit, the one that makes me look my age, and drove to Tyson's Corner with the windows down because I needed the air to keep my head clear. Boyd Prescott was already seated when I walked in. Corner booth, back to the wall, 12 minutes early. He was 61 years old, and he sat in a charcoal suit that cost more than most of my drivers earn in a month. The kind of man who had learned to wear money the way other people wear cologne, just enough to make you notice. His hair was silver now, cut close, and his hands were manicured in a way they never were when we were pouring foundations together. He stood when he saw me and smiled the smile of a man who believed he was about to close the biggest deal of his life. "Vernon," he extended his hand. "It's been too long." I shook it. Firm, warm. I smiled back and sat down across from him, and the white tablecloth between us might as well have been a battlefield drawn in linen. He ordered a ribeye. I ordered sparkling water and a salad. Because I needed every faculty sharp, and because a man performing exhaustion does not order the steak. Boyd noticed. He leaned back and studied me with the easy confidence of someone who has already read the last page. "You look tired, Vernon," he said. "I am tired," I said. That part was not a lie. He cut into the ribeye with the precision of a surgeon. "I'm not here to take anything," he said. "I'm here to help you land this plane gracefully. 35 years is a hell of a run. Let Meridian carry it forward, and you can finally rest." Have you ever sat across from someone you once loved like a brother and listened to him threaten your daughter while cutting a $200 steak? That is the kind of meal you never forget the taste of. The sparkling water went flat in my mouth. The restaurant hummed with the polite noise of people spending money, and Boyd Prescott sat 3 feet away from me, describing the dismantling of my life as if it were a retirement plan. He laid out the terms. Meridian Capital acquires controlling interest. Below market valuation, he did not say the number, but the napkin math was obvious. I would stay on as a figurehead. My name on the door. His hand on the wheel. A graceful transition, he called it. A partnership evolution. Then his voice dropped. Not loud enough for the next table. Just loud enough for me. "Leonie's doing well, I hear. Commercial real estate, competitive field. Long hours, late nights driving home alone." He set his knife down. "It'd be a shame for any external pressures to complicate that for her. Playing weak when you are strong is the hardest performance there is, because every muscle in your body wants to reach across the table and end the conversation the old-fashioned way." I rubbed my forehead. I sighed. I looked at the tablecloth the way a man looks at something he is afraid to lose. "I need time." "Boyd," I said, my voice thin, "this is my whole life you're asking me to hand over." He smiled. Patient, magnanimous. The smile of a man who thinks he has already won. "Of course, take a few days. But Vernon, the market doesn't wait, and neither do my investors. Before I tell you what I noticed next, the detail that turned this lunch from a performance into a weapon, I need to ask, are you still with me? Because what comes next changes who Boyd Prescott really is. Drop your guess in one sentence. What do you think Boyd brought to this lunch that he should not have? A quick note, the next part includes some dramatized details to convey the full emotional weight. The message behind it is what matters most. Boyd talked for another 20 minutes. He mentioned routes, contracts, fuel margins, details only someone with inside access to my operation would know. Every sentence was a confession, dressed in a business proposal. And I sat there, nodding like a man too tired to see it, memorizing every word. When the check came, Boyd grabbed it. Of course he did. He signed with a flourish. I recognized the same trailing pen stroke from the partnership agreement, from the hiring form, from every document that now sat in my logbook like evidence waiting for a courtroom. We stood. He extended his hand again in the lobby, and I took it. That is when I saw them. Silver cufflinks, square cut, brushed finish, with a tiny engraved A on the face. I knew them because I had bought them. I had given them to Boyd the night we signed the lease on our first warehouse. A celebration gift. 2 matching pairs, one for each of us. 23 years ago. Mine are in a drawer at home. His were on his wrists. Catching the overhead light in the lobby of the Capitol Grill while he shook the hand of the man he was robbing. The cool metal pressed against my palm. My cufflinks. My gift. On the wrist of the man dismantling my legacy. "It's good to see you again, Vernon," Boyd said, leaning in. "Truly." I smiled. I held the handshake 1 beat longer than I needed to, feeling the metal warm under my grip. And I said, "You too, Boyd. You too." I walked to my truck in the parking lot and sat behind the wheel for 5 minutes without starting the engine. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from weakness, but from the effort of holding still for 90 minutes while a man I once called brother laid out exactly how he planned to steal everything I had built, and then shook my hand wearing my own gift on his wrist. In 3 days, Murray's banking contact would deliver Meridian's wire transfers. Boyd Prescott had just spent an hour and a half telling a tired old man exactly how the scheme worked. And he had no idea that every word was now a weapon pointed back at him. Murray's banking contact delivered 2 days after the Capitol Grill lunch, right on schedule. I drove to Arlington that morning with Boyd's every word still echoing in my head, and sat down at the same kitchen table where this investigation had started. Murray spread the wire transfer printouts across the surface like a man dealing cards in a game where every hand was a losing one. Column after column of outgoing transfers, failed investment returns, and short-term loans taken at rates no solvent company would accept. He circled a figure near the bottom of the 3rd page and tapped it twice. "Meridian owes $11.4 million in short-term debt coming due in 60 days, he said. "Without a major acquisition, they're insolvent. Boyd isn't greedy. Vernon. He's drowning." I sat with that. The man who had cut a ribeye across from me 3 days ago and talked about graceful transitions and partnership evolutions was not building an empire. He was trying to stop one from burying him alive. My company was not an investment target. It was a life raft for a man going under. And he was willing to threaten my daughter to grab hold of it. Then I saw the second name. 3rd page, halfway down the investor list. Listed as a limited partner with a 6-figure stake. Harold Cobb, a name I had not spoken in years. He was a quiet man who had helped me land my first major shipping contract with Dominion Freight back in 1992. I had always thought of him as someone who gave without expecting return. Now his name sat on the same document as Boyd Prescott's. "Harold Cobb," I said. "I know this name." Murray looked up. "Could be a passive investor. Could be more. Don't jump." "I won't. But I won't forget it either." I drove home that afternoon carrying the printouts in a manila envelope on the passenger seat. The same spot where the logbook and the hiring form had traveled before. My car was becoming a filing cabinet. The evidence was growing faster than my ability to process what it meant about the people I had trusted. At 8:45 that evening, someone knocked on my front door. The boy standing on my porch was 34 years old and looked like he had not slept in a week. I recognized the look. It is the face of a man who has been carrying a lie so heavy it has started breaking his posture. Garrett Lindsay stood under the porch light in a wrinkled jacket, unshaven, holding a USB drive in a fist clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "Mr. Ashford, I know you have no reason to trust me," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "But I can't do this anymore. He's got me by my debts. 40,000 in credit card and a second mortgage he co-signed. If I don't deliver, he calls in everything." I looked at him for a long moment. The night air smelled like cut grass and distant exhaust, and the porch light threw Garrett's shadow long across the front steps. He was not a villain. He was a man Boyd had found at his lowest point and turned into a tool. "Come inside," I said. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Leonie and I had stared at the windshield note, the same table where I had decided to fight. I poured him water. He drank it in one pull and set the glass down with shaking hands. "What's on the drive, Garrett?" I asked. "Emails. Between Boyd and his operations people, timelines, targets, your name in every third message." He wiped his face with his palm. "And a date, October 15th. That's when the shareholder meeting happens. If you haven't signed by then, they go public with everything. The smear campaign, the health rumors, all of it. Full scorched earth. 10 days. That was what I had between keeping everything I had built and watching a desperate man burn it down because I would not hand it over quietly." I took the USB drive from him. It was warm from his fist. I turned it over in my hand. A cheap black stick. The kind you buy in a 3-pack at an office supply store, holding 14 months of a man's conspiracy and 2 gigabytes. "Go home," I said. "Don't contact Boyd. Don't contact anyone. I'll figure out what to do with this and with you." Garrett stood. He looked like he wanted to say something else, an apology, maybe, or an explanation that would make any of this feel less broken. He said nothing. He walked out the front door and down the steps, and I watched his taillights disappear before I closed the door and locked it. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and plugged in the drive. The files opened in seconds. Email threads, spreadsheets, internal memos. The timestamps on the oldest thread went back 14 months. Boyd had been planning this since before the first spoofed call, before the sedan question, before the windshield note, before any of it reached my phone or my daughter's car. 14 months of mapping my company, my contracts, my family. I scrolled through the threads methodically, the way Murray had taught me to read financial documents, looking for the structural detail, not the noise. Most of it confirmed what I already knew. Then I reached the bottom of the oldest email chain. A message from Boyd to his operations manager, dated more than a year before any of this touched my life. One line. 7 words, start with the daughter he'll fold if she's in the picture. I closed the laptop. Slowly. The way a man handles something he knows will change how angry he is allowed to be. The screen went dark, and I sat in the kitchen with my hands flat on the table and my jaw locked, and the knowledge that Boyd Prescott had written my daughter's name into a plan before I had any idea a plan existed. The evidence was complete. The logbook, the cassette, the wire transfers, the emails, the deadline, 10 days. And now a sentence that proved Leonie was never collateral damage. She was the opening move. I did not tell Leonie about that email, not yet. Not the 7 words Boyd had written about her 14 months before any of us knew a war was coming. I closed the laptop, sat in the kitchen until my hands unclenched, and then called her downstairs. There would be time for rage later. Right now, we needed a plan. She looked at the evidence spread across our dining table. The logbook, the cassette, the wire transfer printouts, the USB drive, and asked the only question that mattered. Do we have enough time? I counted the days. The shareholder meeting was October 15th, 10 days. We had a cassette recording with a background sound that proved a professional operation. We had a logbook spanning years. We had Meridian's bleeding financials. We had Garrett's emails with Boyd's name threaded through every decision. And we had the HR file with a guarantor's signature that tied the whole thing to a man I once called a partner. It's enough to interest the FBI, I said. It's not enough to convict without Boyd saying the words himself. I called Murray. He answered the way he always does, quick, alert, ready. We're moving, I said. What do I need? A sit-down with my contact at the Bureau, Agent Nolan Stanton, Financial Crimes Division, Washington Field Office. He's sharp and he doesn't waste time. But you need to bring everything organized, not a box of loose papers. A case. And you need to do it before the end of next week. 10 days. I have built trucks, poured foundations, buried my wife, and raised a daughter in this house. And now I had 10 days to make sure a man I once trusted did not take all of it. 10 days to turn a dining table full of documents into something a federal agent would act on. 10 days before Boyd's deadline. Landed and every option I had left disappeared. Then we move, I said. No more waiting. Murray started outlining the delivery strategy, how to package the evidence, what order to present it, which pieces would carry the most weight with a financial crimes prosecutor. Leonie sat beside me, taking notes on a legal pad, her handwriting neat and fast, the same penmanship she used for contract summaries. She was not frightened anymore. She was working. We were 30 minutes into the call when the lights flickered. Once. The overhead bulb dimmed and recovered. Leonie looked up from the legal pad. I kept talking to Murray. Then the lights flickered again. Longer this time. A full second of darkness before they came back. And then they did not come back. The house went black. Not the gradual brownout of a storm rolling through, not the neighborhood-wide blink of a transformer blowing. This was instant, total. The refrigerator stopped humming. The clock on the microwave went dark. The only light in the room was the green glow of my phone screen, still connected to Murray. The lights did not go out the way they do in a storm, slowly, with warning. They went out the way they do when someone pulls a breaker with purpose. Murray, I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before he could answer. Dad. Leonie's voice came from 2 feet away, steady but tight. Hallway, now. Don't run, walk. I know this house better than whoever's out there. I put my hand on her shoulder and guided her through the kitchen doorway, down the hall, past the bathroom, to the interior closet I had reinforced 3 years ago with a solid core door and a deadbolt. It was not a panic room. It was the quiet precaution of a man who had always known that building something worth millions made you worth targeting. Inside a charged phone, a flashlight, and enough space for 2 people to stand without breathing too loudly. I closed the door, turned the deadbolt. The click was the loudest sound in the house. I dialed 911 with hands that were steady because I would not allow them to be otherwise. Break-in in progress, I said, my voice flat and precise. 4217 Maple Ridge Lane, Falls Chapru. 2 occupants inside. Someone has cut the external power. We are hearing movement at the back of the house. The dispatcher confirmed. Units en route. 4 minutes. My daughter's breathing in the dark beside me was the steadiest sound in that house. She did not whisper. She did not cry. What Ashford women do. They hold the line while the world decides whether it is coming through the door. Dad, are they inside? She asked. Not yet. And they won't be. Then we heard it. Footsteps on the back patio. Slow, deliberate. The careful placement of someone testing the ground before committing weight. 1 step. 2. Then the sound of a hand on the back door handle. Not a knock, not a rattle. Just the quiet pressure of someone turning metal to see if it would give. The handle held. The deadbolt held. The footsteps paused. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. The dispatcher's voice was a thread of calm in the darkness. Units are 2 minutes out, sir. Stay where you are. The handle turned once more. Stopped. And then the footsteps changed faster now, no longer careful, moving across the patio toward the side fence. Whoever it was had heard what I heard, sirens, faint, but building, coming from the east, the direction of the Fairfax County station. The footsteps scrambled over the fence. Something clattered against the fence post, small, hard, plastic. And then silence. The kind of silence that follows a retreat, not a resolution. Leonie's grip on my forearm did not loosen. The sirens grew louder. Red and blue light began to sweep through the gaps around the closet door, painting thin lines across the ceiling. Whoever had come to my house in the dark had left in a hurry. But they had left something behind. And in 4 minutes. A Fairfax County patrol officer would find it lying in the grass near the fence post, and it would change everything we thought we knew about how close Boyd's people had been willing to get. 2 patrol cars and a flashlight beam cutting through my backyard at midnight, that is what it looks like when a financial crime finally becomes a real one. The red and blue lights swept the fence in slow arcs, painting the garden bed and the patio stones in colors that do not belong in a quiet Virginia neighborhood. Leonie stood in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed and her face lit by the cruiser glow. And I stood beside an officer in the grass and watched him find what the intruder left behind. Officer Graves was a Fairfax County patrolman with a flashlight in one hand and an evidence bag in the other, the first person outside my family to hold proof that what was happening to us was real. He walked the fence line methodically, shining the beam along the base of each post, and stopped at the corner where the side fence meets the back property line. "Looks like you went over here in a hurry," Graves said. He crouched and held up the light. Boot prints in the turned soil of the garden bed, deep at the toe where the runner had pushed off, and beside the fence post, lying in the grass, like something dropped mid-stride, a black prepaid phone. Cheap model, screen still lit. Graves sealed it in the evidence bag and held it up so I could see. A burner phone in an evidence bag does not look like much, just black plastic and a cracked screen. But to a man who has been collecting ghosts in a spiral notebook for weeks, it looked like the first thing that could bleed. Every other piece of evidence I had was something I had gathered myself. This was something the other side had left behind. And it existed outside my logbook, outside my word, outside the question of whether a 67-year-old man was imagining things. Leonie stepped into the yard. "Will that phone actually lead anywhere?" she asked. Graves looked at her. "Depends on who activated it and where. But it's more than you had an hour ago." I asked to file a full report. Not just tonight. Everything the spoofed calls. The surveillance, the windshield note. The pattern that had been building since the first call weeks ago. Graves nodded and sat with me at the kitchen table while his partner finished the perimeter check. Leonie brewed coffee strong. Too much cream. The way she always makes it when she is shaken and needs to keep her hands busy. I drank it and tasted her worry in every sip. The officers left at 2 in the morning. The power came back on 20 minutes later. Someone from the county utility restored it after confirming the breaker had been manually tripped at the external panel. Not a surge, not a fault. A hand on a switch. I did not sleep. I sat in the study with the door open and the hallway light on, listening to the house settle back into its rhythms. Leonie's footsteps upstairs, pacing for an hour before they stopped. The refrigerator resuming its hum, the furnace clicking on. Normal sounds in a house that no longer felt normal. There is a moment every self-made man hits when he realizes the thing he built with his hands cannot be saved by his hands alone. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, recruiting Murray, running a bait operation, and protecting my daughter. And someone had still walked up to my back door in the dark and tried to come inside. My hands were not enough. My logbook was not enough. The next step required something I had resisted my entire adult life, handing control to someone else and trusting them to do what I could not. At 5 in the morning, I called Murray. His voice was alert, no trace of sleep. The man kept hours that would concern a doctor and impress a detective. This isn't a boardroom play anymore. Vernon, he said when I finished, someone sent a man to your house in the middle of the night. That's criminal trespass. That's stalking. Combined with the spoofing and the emails, that's federal if we package it right.
How fast can you get me in front of your contact?
48 hours. Stanton's good. He's been running financial crimes out of the Washington field office for 12 years. But he needs everything organized. No gaps, no guesses, no loose threads. A clean package. I looked at the desk. The evidence was already there, spread across the surface in the gray light of a dawn that was just beginning to push through the curtains. The logbook, the cassette, the USB drive, the wire transfer printouts, the HR file with the guarantor signature. And now a police report number for the break-in 7 digits on a carbon copy form that turned a night of terror into an official record. 48 hours to organize 35 years of a man's life into a folder that fits on a federal agent's desk. How do you decide what matters? You decide the way I have decided everything since the first call. You start with the facts. You follow the money. And you let the evidence tell the story you've been living. Vernon, Murray said. Quieter now. This is the part where you stop being the investigator and start being the witness. Can you do that? I looked at the 7 pieces of evidence on my desk. 14 months of Boyd's planning laid bare in paper and tape and a USB drive no bigger than my thumb. The logbook sat at the center, its cloth cover worn soft from years of my hands opening it in the dark to record calls that no one else believed were real. I've been a witness since 3 in the morning on day 1, I said. I'm just finally ready to talk. I hung up and sat in the study as the dawn light crept across the desk. 7 pieces of evidence, a 48-hour window, and somewhere at the FBI Washington field office, a man named Agent Nolan Stanton who might already know more about Meridian Capital than any of us expected. The private war was about to become something larger. And for the first time since that phone rang in the dark, I was not carrying it alone. 48 hours later. Murray and I walked into the FBI Washington field office, carrying a banker's box between us. Every document organized. Every timeline annotated. Every piece of evidence labeled in the order Murray insisted a federal agent would want to see it. My hands were steadier than they had been in weeks. Fear settles once you stop running from it. The security guard handed me a visitor badge. I clipped it to my coat pocket and followed Murray through a corridor that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and stale government coffee. Past offices with closed doors and fluorescent lights that buzzed at a frequency designed to make you feel like time had stopped. Agent Nolan Stanton stood when we entered the conference room. He was 44 years old. Suit jacket off. Sleeves rolled to the forearm. The kind of man who looked like he had been in that room since 6 in the morning because he had. His handshake was firm and brief. He gestured to the chairs across from him and sat down behind a beige laminate table that held a single manila folder, already thick. "Mr. Ashford," he said. "Murray's told me the broad strokes. Walk me through it from the beginning." I did. I opened the banker's box and laid each piece on the table in order: the logbook, the cassette, the HR file, the wire transfers, the USB drive, the police report from the break-in. Every item a chapter, every chapter a cost. Carrying that box into the FBI felt like handing over a piece of my own chest. Every document in there had cost me something I could not name on a receipt. Stanton listened without interrupting. He made notes. He played 30 seconds of the cassette, nodded, and set it aside. He studied the wire transfer printouts the longest, running his finger down columns of routing numbers with the practiced eye of a man who reads money the way other people read weather. Then he opened his own folder. Inside were surveillance photographs, bank statements, and a timeline printed on federal letterhead. He slid it across the table and let me read. "Mr. Ashford, we've been watching Meridian Capital since January," Stanton said. "Securities fraud, pension fund manipulation out of their Baltimore office. We've had the broad financial architecture for months. What we couldn't prove was how Prescott was moving money domestically, how the funds were flowing from legitimate businesses into Meridian's short-term debt structure. He tapped my wire transfer printouts. You just filled that gap. There is a difference between knowing a man robbed you and hearing a federal agent confirm it with case numbers and surveillance dates. One is suspicion. The other is a trap door opening under your feet. I sat in that conference room and stared at the FBI's own file on Boyd Prescott, and felt something between vindication and vertigo. 9 months, I said. You've been watching him for 9 months, and nobody thought to tell the man he was robbing? Stanton did not flinch. We didn't know about Ashford Regional until you walked through that door. Prescott's domestic targets weren't visible from the securities side. Your logbook, the HR file, the emails. That's the bridge between his funds fraud and his personal operation against your company. Without you, we had a financial crime. With you, we have a pattern. Murray leaned forward. What do you need from us? Nolan. Stanton closed the folder. He looked at me, not at Murray. Not at the evidence, at me. And his voice dropped the professional register it had held for the last 40 minutes. I need something a federal subpoena can't get me, he said. I need Prescott talking, on tape, about the acquisition, the shell accounts, your daughter's real estate connections, in his own words. In a setting he chose to enter voluntarily. The room hummed. The ventilation system pushed stale air through the ceiling vents, and the fluorescent lights buzzed their indifferent buzz. And I sat in a windowless room in a federal building and understood what he was asking me to do. We wire you, Stanton continued. You take a meeting with Prescott, lunch, drinks, whatever feels natural. You get him talking about the deal. We record everything. The shareholder meeting is 5 days out. We move before it happens. And if he suspects, I asked, then we pull you out and go with what we have. But what we have without you is a securities case. With you. It's fraud, conspiracy, and the attempted theft of a company worth tens of millions. The difference between those two outcomes is whether you're willing to sit in a room with the man who did this and let him believe he's winning. How do you sit across a dinner table from a man who sent someone to break into your daughter's home and pretend you are still his friend? You do it the same way you have done everything else since that first call at 3 a.m. You keep your hands steady. You keep your voice even. And you remember that the man across the table thinks he already knows who you are, and that is exactly what gives you the advantage. I was quiet for a long time. Murray did not push. Stanton did not push. They let the silence do what silence does in a room where the stakes are real. It gives a man space to find his own answer. Where does the meeting happen? I asked. Stanton closed his folder. That's up to you. But Mr. Ashford, we need you in that room. I stood. I shook his hand. The laminate table was cold under my palms, and the visitor badge pulled at my lapel. And the vending machine coffee I had poured sat untouched in its paper cup, gone cold. When? I said. Stanton held the handshake a beat longer than necessary. Tomorrow night. We've already set it up a reservation at the Ashford Regional Logistics Office in Manassas. Sent from a cloned number this morning. Prescott accepted within the hour. He thinks you're ready to sign. Boyd Prescott believed he was walking into a surrender. He had no idea he was walking into a federal recording. And I had 24 hours to become the most convincing liar I had ever been for the second time in my life. And last. The wire itched like a second conscience taped to my ribs. An FBI technician had fitted it that afternoon, a small device no bigger than a book of matches. Adhesive strips pulling at my chest hair every time I breathed. I sat behind my desk at the Manassas yard with a fake acquisition agreement spread across the surface, and a cup of coffee I had poured an hour ago and never touched. Through the blinds, I watched Boyd Prescott's black sedan pull into the gravel lot at 6:15, right on time, like a man arriving to collect what he believed was already his. Gravel crunched under his shoes as he crossed the yard. I heard the front door open, heard him greet Donna's empty desk with the casual familiarity of someone who used to belong here. Then he was in my doorway, filling it the way he always had. Broad shoulders, easy smile, the cologne he had worn for decades reaching the room before his handshake did. "Vernon?" He sat down across from me without being asked. "Let's make this official." I slid the fake agreement across the desk. He picked it up and began flipping pages. And within 30 seconds, the performance I had feared would be the hardest of my life became the easiest. Because Boyd could not help himself. The moment he believed he had won, the mask came off, and the man underneath was uglier than I had ever allowed myself to see. "You should have signed this a year ago," he said, scanning the terms with a smile. "Would have saved you a lot of sleepless nights. But I needed you tired. Tired men make desperate decisions. There is a particular kind of evil in a man who can look you in the eye, call you by your first name, and describe how he dismantled your daughter's career like he is reading a quarterly report." Boyd did exactly that. He leaned back in the chair across from my desk and talked about the spoofed calls like logistics costs per deployment, target frequency, the importance of varying the scripts so the mark does not recognize a pattern. He talked about my daughter the way a contractor talks about a load-bearing wall he needs to remove. "Leonie's good at her job," he said. "Too good. I needed her distracted. Garrett handled that. The calls to her clients, the sedan outside her building, cost me less than a month's parking." I kept my voice level. My hands were flat on the desk because if I lifted them, they would form fists. And if they formed fists, the wire would record the sound of a 67-year-old man ending a conversation the wrong way. "And Harold Cobb?" I asked. Boyd waved his hand. "Cobb doesn't know what day it is. I needed a name on the investor sheet that wasn't mine. He signed a form at a golf outing. That's the extent of Harold Cobb's involvement in anything." I let it go. Murray had been right. Some names are just names. Cobb had signed at a golf outing the same way half the industry signs things without reading them. And there was no version of this story where chasing that thread was worth the time we did not have. Every word a confession. Every sentence a gift to the recording device strapped to my chest. Boyd Prescott sat in the office we had built together and described the architecture of his betrayal with the pride of a man showing off blueprints. I let him talk for 25 minutes. I nodded. I sighed. I rubbed my forehead and asked tired questions that kept him rolling. And when he finished explaining how the reputation campaign would have escalated if I had not agreed to sell, I set my pen down on the desk. That was the signal. The rear hallway door opened on its pneumatic hinge, a soft sound. Almost gentle. The kind of sound you would miss if you were not listening for it. The sound of a federal badge hitting a desk is small. Just plastic and metal. But in a quiet room it lands like a verdict. "Boyd Prescott, FBI," Stanton said. He stood in the doorway with 2 agents behind him. Badge in his left hand, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man who has done this before. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and criminal harassment. Stand up, hands on the desk." Boyd did not stand. He sat perfectly still. His eyes moved from Stanton to the badge, to the agents, and then to me. Not to my face. To my chest. He stared at the spot where the wire sat beneath my shirt, and I watched the understanding arrive in his expression like a door closing. "You wore a wire," he said. His voice was quiet. "In your own office. Against me. You broke into my daughter's home," I said. "You tried to take everything I built. This is my office. This is where it ends." The agents moved forward. Boyd stood slowly, placing his hands flat on the desk the way I had been placing mine for the last half hour. The handcuff ratchet clicked twice, a small mechanical sound that carried more finality than any sentence a judge would later deliver. I built that company with my hands, and the man I built it beside was leaving it in handcuffs. The worst part was not the betrayal. It was how long I had let it go on before I believed it. 35 years. Vernon, Boyd said as the agents took his arms. 35 years, I said. And you threw every one of them away. They walked him through the dispatch office, past Donna's desk, through the front door, and into the loading yard. The sodium lamps had clicked on automatically, casting long amber light across the gravel and the truck bays. Boyd's shoes crunched the same gravel they had crunched 1,000 times before. But this time, an agent held each arm, and the black sedan he had arrived in sat empty, while an unmarked federal car waited with its back door open. Before they put him in, Boyd turned. He did not look at me. He looked up at the Ashford Regional Logistics sign above the warehouse bay. The sign I had hung the year we opened. The sign with both our initials still on the original blueprints buried somewhere in the records room. Something in his face broke, not anger, not defiance. Something older and smaller. Something that looked like the last flicker of the man he had been before greed replaced everything else. Then the car door closed. The gravel settled. And Boyd Prescott was gone. The office smelled like Boyd's cologne for 3 days after they took him. Every morning I opened the windows. And every evening it was still there in the chair upholstery, in the curtains like the room refused to forget him before I could. The night of the arrest. After the federal car disappeared and the yard went quiet, I sat behind my desk and did not move. The sodium lamps cast amber light through the blinds. The trucks were parked. The dispatch radio was off. For the first time in 35 years, the yard sounded like an empty lot. And I understood that what I had saved and what I had lost were measured in the same currency. I opened the top desk drawer looking for nothing in particular. Underneath old pens and rubber bands, I found a photograph, glassy, curling at the edges, faded to the warm sepia that the 90s become when enough time passes. 2 young men in work shirts standing in front of a single box truck with a fresh logo on the door. We were 32, sunburned, grinning like men who thought sweat equity was the only kind that mattered. How do you grieve a man who is still alive, who is sitting in a federal holding cell 12 miles from the yard where you once split your last paycheck with him? You do not tear up the photograph. You close the drawer and sit with the knowledge that the man in that picture died a long time ago, and the man they arrested was someone else wearing his face. I called Leonie. It's done, sweetheart. He's gone. Are you okay? Her voice was careful, the voice of a daughter who hears the answer underneath the words. I don't know what I am yet. I'll figure it out when I get home. Dad, come home. The office will still be there tomorrow. That's the first time in 2 months I've believed that. I drove home with the radio off and let the silence fill the spaces where the noise used to be. The next 3 days moved slowly. The way time moves when the crisis ends and the body finally allows itself to feel what it has been carrying. Leonie cooked garlic and rosemary, her recipe for keeping her hands busy. I ate without tasting. We talked about things that had nothing to do with Boyd Prescott. Normal things. The vocabulary of a life returning to itself. On the second evening, she set her fork down and looked at me with guilt carefully assembled on her face. I should have seen it, she said. The sedan, the calls dropping, the clients pulling back. I should have told you sooner. A daughter should not have to apologize for being the target. If you have ever watched your child blame herself for something a grown man engineered over 14 months with corporate resources and commercial-grade tools, you know the anger does not fade. It changes shape. It stops being anger at the man who did it and becomes something fiercer, the need to make sure your child never carries that weight again. He spent over a year making sure nobody could see it, I said. You didn't miss it, Leonie. It was hidden from you on purpose. That's not your failure, that's his crime. She held my forearm across the table, squeezed once, and let go. We finished dinner in the kind of quiet that says more than conversation. The following morning I called Stanton. Not about Boyd. About Garrett. Lindsay was 34 when Boyd got to him, I said. Drowning in debt, and Boyd threw him a rope that turned out to be a leash. I'm not asking you to drop charges. I'm asking you to tell the judge he chose the right side when it mattered. He showed up at my door with that drive when he didn't have to. Stanton said he would note it in the file. He did not promise anything. Federal agents do not promise. But his voice carried the tone of a man who knows the difference between a conspirator and hostage. A little over a week later, a courier knocked on the front door. I opened it to a young man holding a clipboard and an envelope made of cream-colored paper, heavier than anything that arrives in regular mail. A subpoena is just paper and ink, but it lands on your porch like a stone dropped into still water. You know the ripples have not even started yet. I signed the receipt, carried the envelope to the kitchen table, and opened it beside my coffee. U.S. District Court, Eastern District of Virginia, Alexandria. Blue-bordered header, my name in typed capital letters, a date, November 3rd. Leonie watched me read it. You're going to have to say all of it out loud in a courtroom, aren't you? Every word, I said. And this time you won't be able to turn it off. I set the subpoena on the table and looked at it the way you look at a road you know you have to walk, even though you can already see where it ends. In 12 days, I would sit in a federal courtroom and say Boyd Prescott's name under oath. I would describe the calls, the sedan, the cologne in my office, the cufflinks on his wrist, every detail, every betrayal. 35 years of brotherhood would become a matter of public record spoken into a microphone, transcribed by a clerk, and filed in a system that does not forget. November 3rd arrived gray and cold. I put on the suit I wore to my wife's funeral, the only one that ever felt serious enough for a day that would change everything. Leonie drove me to the Alexandria courthouse in silence, and I walked through the metal detectors carrying nothing but the truth and the dryness in my mouth that comes from knowing you are about to say things out loud that can never be unsaid. The bailiff said, "State your name for the record." And I realized that in 67 years of living, no one had ever asked me to say my own name like it was evidence. I stated it. I raised my right hand. I swore. And then I looked across the courtroom and saw Boyd Prescott sitting at the defense table 10 feet away, in a gray suit with his hands folded, watching me, with an expression I could not read. Judge Harwell presided from the bench with the unhurried authority of a man who had spent 20 years hearing people lie, and could measure the truth by how quiet a room got. The prosecutor walked me through it from the beginning. The first spoofed call, the logbook, the pattern of dead numbers stretching back years. I described each piece of evidence the way Murray had taught me, chronologically, factually, without editorializing. The logbook was entered as Exhibit 3. 11 years of entries in my own handwriting. Every suspicious number logged, every dead callback recorded. The defense attorney would later call it the obsessive habit of an aging man. The prosecutor called it the most detailed private surveillance record he had seen in 20 years of federal practice. A courtroom is the only place in America where telling the truth feels like swinging an axe. Every answer lands, and you can hear the wood split. I described the break-in. I described the wire. I described sitting across from Boyd at my own desk while he bragged about dismantling my daughter's career and called it strategic repositioning. The courtroom was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people stop breathing at the same time. The defense tried on cross-examination. Boyd's attorney stood and suggested the spoofed calls could have been competitive intelligence common in the freight industry. Regrettable, but not criminal. Mr. Ashford, isn't it possible these were simply aggressive business practices? He asked. Competitive business doesn't send a man to pry open your daughter's back door at midnight, counselor, I said. The attorney sat down, The judge made a note. Boyd's hands went still on the defense table. After the lunch recess, the prosecutor called for Exhibit 14, a cassette recording. The clerk set the player on the evidence table, a small machine, outdated, the kind of device most people in that courtroom had not seen since the 90s. The prosecutor explained its provenance. A personal recorder I kept beside my bed for late-night dispatch confirmations, running the night of the first spoofed call. The defense objected. Judge Harwell looked at the attorney over his glasses. Virginia is a one-party consent state, counselor. Sit down. The clerk pressed play. If you have never heard your best friend's voice played back in a federal courtroom as evidence of a crime against your family, you cannot understand the way the room tilts. Like gravity just picked a side. Boyd's voice filled every corner, clear, confident, unmistakable. Discussing the acquisition timeline, the valuation strategy, and my daughter by name. His recorded words carried with a clarity the old cassette machine had no right to produce. Every syllable reached the back row. Every pause landed. The courtroom heard what I had heard alone in my bedroom months ago. And now it belonged to the public record. The defense attorney stood again. Halfway through the recording, Your Honor, this recording was obtained without the knowledge of— I've ruled, Counselor, Judge Harwell said. The recording continues. It continued. Boyd's voice described how Leonie's client list determined the real estate appraisals, how removing her from the equation would force a lower valuation, how the entire operation depended on making me tired enough to sell before I understood what I was selling. The tape ran for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, the clerk pressed stop, and the mechanical click echoed in a room that had gone absolutely silent. Boyd did not look up. His head dropped slowly toward the defense table. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance. The quiet surrender of a man hearing his own voice say things he had believed would never leave the room where he said them. His attorney whispered something. Boyd did not respond. His hands stayed flat on the table, fingers spread, motionless. Boyd did not look up when the tape ended. And I realized I had spent 2 months wanting him to see what he had done. But watching him break was not victory. It was just the last thing we would ever share. I stepped down from the witness stand. My legs were heavier than I expected, the weight of hours of testimony settling into my knees and my back, and the place behind my sternum where adrenaline lives when it has nowhere left to go. I walked down the center aisle, past the defense table, close enough to touch Boyd's shoulder. I did not touch it. Leonie was in the gallery's front row. She sat with her purse strap gripped in both hands and her jaw set. And the look on her face told me the recording had played exactly the way it sounded, like a man describing how to dismantle a family and calling it strategy. I sat down beside her. She did not speak. She put her hand over mine on the bench, and we sat together in the silence of a courtroom that had just heard the worst of what one man could do to another, and was still deciding what it meant. The judge called a recess. The gallery began to murmur. Somewhere behind us, a court reporter's fingers stopped moving. And at the defense table, Boyd Prescott sat with his head bowed and his hands flat and said nothing at all. Because for the first time in his life, there was nothing left to say. The foreman stood, unfolded a single sheet of paper, and I learned that the word guilty sounds different when it's about someone you once loved. 3 days had passed since the recording played. Now the jury was back, and the foreman, a retired school teacher with reading glasses on a chain, held the verdict form and read, "Wire fraud, guilty. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud, guilty. Criminal harassment, guilty. Intimidation, guilty. 4 counts. 4 words. Each one landing in my chest like a nail-driven flush. Leonie's hand found mine on the gallery bench. Her grip was so tight I could feel her pulse through her fingers. I did not look at Boyd. I looked at the jury, 12 strangers who had compressed 2 months of my life into 5 days of testimony. And I tried to feel relief, vindication, something resembling victory. I felt none of it. I felt tired. Judge Harwell set sentencing for that afternoon. The defense requested a continuance. Denied. At 2:15. Boyd stood at the defense table in the same gray suit he had worn every day of the trial, and the judge looked down at him with the expression of a man reading remarks he had already written. "Mr. Prescott," Judge Harwell said, "you exploited a 35-year relationship to systematically defraud a man who trusted you. You weaponized that trust against his family, his business, and his peace of mind. This court sentences you to 14 years in federal custody and orders full restitution of all assets obtained through fraudulent means. What do you do with 35 years of memories when a jury tells you half of them were a lie? Do you throw out the whole album? Or just the pages where he is smiling?" The judge continued. "All coerced agreements involving my company were voided. The valuation stood, independent, whole, untouched." Boyd's attorney nodded mechanically, writing notes he would never use again. Then Judge Harwell asked Boyd if he wished to address the court. Boyd stood. He placed both hands flat on the defense table, the gesture of a man about to take command of a conversation. Every person in that courtroom expected him to speak. Boyd Prescott had talked his way through every room he ever entered. He opened his mouth. "I have nothing to say, Your Honor," he said. Flat. Not defeated, emptied. In 35 years, I had never once heard Boyd decline an opportunity to speak. His silence told the courtroom more than any confession could have. He knew what he had done, and no arrangement of words would undo it. The marshals came from the side door. Boyd held out his wrists. The cuffs clicked, a small, metallic sound that carried across the room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. They walked him out through the side exit, his shoes making a steady rhythm on the floor that grew quieter with each step until the door closed and there was nothing left of Boyd Prescott except the verdict form on the clerk's desk. Leonie squeezed my hand. "It's over, Dad," she said. "The case is over," I said. "The rest of it, I don't think that part ends." We sat until the room emptied. Then we walked through the hallway, and I pushed open the courthouse door. The brass handle was cold under my palm, and the November air hit my face like water thrown from across the room. Courthouse steps are built steep for a reason. They make you slow down on the way out, as if the building knows you need a minute before the world asks what happened in there. Reporters waited at the bottom two cameras, a woman with a microphone. I waved them off. Leonie walked beside me, her breath visible in the cold. And we stopped halfway down. The stone handrail was rough under my hand. Below us. Traffic moved as if nothing had happened. Cars and buses, the ordinary machinery of a world that had not been inside that courtroom. "Do you feel lighter?" Leonie asked. I looked out at the parking lot. "I thought I would," I said. "I've been carrying this since September. Longer though, really. But watching them put cuffs on him didn't give me anything back. It just confirmed what was already gone." She was quiet. Traffic filled the space where words should have been. "I miss who he was, Leonie. Not who he became. The Boyd who helped me load the first truck, that man has been dead for years. Today was just the funeral I never got to have. If you have ever won something that cost you everything it was supposed to protect, you know the silence on the other side is not peace. It is just the first morning without a war to fight." Leonie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then we go home, and we stop letting him take up space in our house." That's the smartest thing anyone has said to me in 2 months. We walked down the rest of the steps. At the bottom, I stopped and looked back up at the courthouse, the columns, the carved stone, windows reflecting gray sky. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my car keys. They felt heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I'd forgotten what ordinary things weighed after months of carrying nothing ordinary. "Let's go home," I said. Leonie took my arm. We crossed the lot and she pulled a thermos from the center console. Lukewarm coffee from the morning. I drank it, and it tasted perfect. We pulled out onto the road toward Falls Church. And for the first time since September, home did not feel like a place under siege. It felt like a place worth driving back to. I held that office key for 35 years, carried it on the same ring as my house key, my truck key, and the spare to a storage unit I had forgotten about. And the morning I decided to give it away was the first morning it felt like it weighed something. 3 weeks had passed since the verdict. 3 weeks since Leone and I drove home from Alexandria and walked into a house that finally felt like ours again. I spent those weeks doing nothing remarkable. Paying bills, returning calls from clients who had heard the news, sleeping past 5 for the first time in months. Then Saturday came, and I drove to the Manassas yard with one thing in my pocket and one decision already made. Leone was waiting by the front entrance. She had coffee, 2 cups, black, no cream, no sugar, the way I had always made it. She handed me one without asking how I was doing, which told me she already knew. We walked into my office together. Morning light came through the blinds and fell across the desk in stripes. And the room smelled the way it always had: old leather, coffee, and the faint ghost of a cologne that did not belong to me and was finally fading. I set the key on the desk between us. It clicked against the wood, a small sound that carried. "This office has had one key and one owner for 35 years, I said. "I'm not retiring, I'm promoting. The company needs someone who'll be here for the next 35. Leone looked at the key. She did not pick it up yet. "Before you answer," I said, and opened the desk drawer. The letter sat beside the logbook. Plain white envelope, federal facility postmark, handwriting I had known for 3 decades. I set it on the desk next to the key. "Boyd wrote me from prison," I said. 2 sentences. He said he was sorry, and he asked if I'd visit. Leone picked up the envelope and turned it over. "Did you reply?" "No. And I won't. But I'm not throwing it away either. Some things belong in a drawer, not in a trash can. If someone you trusted for 35 years writes you 2 sentences from a prison cell, you will read them not because you owe him that, but because the man you remember would have done the same for you. And you are not ready to pretend he never existed." Leone set the letter down and picked up the key. She held it in her palm and looked at me with an expression I recognized. The same look her mother used to give me when I made a decision without consulting anyone and happened to get it right. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "You're a 36-year-old commercial real estate broker who just watched a federal investigation from the inside," I said. "You know every contract, every property, every client name. You were ready before any of this started. Boyd just made sure we both found out." She closed her hand around the key. That was her answer. We drank the coffee and talked about the transition, which clients to call first, which contracts needed review, where the insurance documents lived, ordinary things. The kind of conversation I had imagined having with Boyd 20 years from now. Sitting in this same office, handing him the same key. That version of the future had been dead longer than I knew. This version was better. At dusk, we walked out into the yard. A truck yard at sunset looks like a painting nobody hangs. 18-wheelers lined up in their bays like horses in a stable, sodium lamps starting to glow, the whole place smelling like diesel and gravel dust and the kind of work that does not apologize for itself. November air carried wood smoke from somewhere beyond the fence line, and the sky had turned the color of old copper. Leone leaned against a bay door and laughed. It was the first real laugh I had heard from her since September. "You know what's funny?" she said. "That gray sedan, the one that scared me half to death back in September, it's the reason we caught all of it. If Garrett hadn't been so obvious sitting outside the house, you'd never have connected him to Boyd. $52 million saved by a man who couldn't park discreetly," I said. She laughed again. The sound echoed off the warehouse walls and bounced around the yard like it belonged there. I walked back into the office and took the logbook from the drawer. Its leather cover was worn smooth under my hands. 11 years of entries. Every suspicious number logged. Every dead callback recorded. I opened it to the last page. Blank. White. No number to write, no pattern to trace, no call to log. Last page, I said. 11 years, and not one of those calls was what it seemed. This page is blank. Leonie looked over my shoulder. Good, she said. Leave it that way. I closed the logbook and did not open it again, not because the calls had stopped, but because the man who needed to write them down had finally become the man who could put the pen away. Your mother would have hated every minute of this, I said, looking out at the yard. But she would have loved how it ended. Her daughter running the place, the trucks still rolling, and her husband finally learning when to stop. Leonie locked the office with her key, and we walked into the yard together. The fleet was parked, the lamps hummed. I tucked the logbook under my arm and walked to my truck. And somewhere in the glove compartment was the same pen I used to write the first entry 11 years ago. I did not reach for it. Some pages are better left blank. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 35 years trusting a man who was quietly taking apart everything I built. I ignored the signs because loyalty made me blind. I told myself that a friend who shows up every day cannot be the same person working against you behind closed doors. Don't make my mistake. Don't let the length of a relationship silence the voice in your gut that says something is wrong. This was never supposed to be a revenge story. I didn't set out to put my best friend in prison. I set out to protect my daughter and save a company that feeds families. But sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to face the person destroying it, even when that person used to help you build it. I believe God put me through this trial, not as punishment, but as a lesson that real strength is not in holding on to people who hurt you, but in knowing when to let go and trust that justice will find its way. Every revenge story people hear is really a story about someone who finally decided they deserved better. I hope mine reminds you that you deserve better too. If this story moved you, I would be grateful if you left a comment and told me what part hit you the hardest. Share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight. A friend, a parent, someone going through their own quiet battle. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. But the heart of it, the betrayal, the fight, the lesson, that part is real. God bless you, and I will see you in the next one.